An entire war broke out because of a pastry shop? No, really. France bombed Mexico over a baker's complaint, and that's just the beginning of history's most absurd war declarations. The War Over a Severed Ear, 1739. You know a war is off to a ridiculous start when the main evidence for it is an ear. And not just any ear, a rotting 9-year-old ear. This was the catalyst for the War of Jenkins' Ear, 1739 to 1748, between Britain and Spain, a conflict so bizarre it barely needed exaggeration. In 1731, British merchant Robert Jenkins was sailing near the Caribbean when Spanish Coast Guard stopped his ship, accusing him of smuggling. Now, the Spanish weren't exactly known for their hospitality, so they allegedly cut off Jenkins' ear as a warning to Britain. He was then told to deliver a message to his king. This is what happens when you mess with Spain. Jenkins did what any rational man would do. He put his severed ear in a jar and took it back to England. And then, nothing happened. For nearly a decade, no one cared. But in 1739, Britain was looking for an excuse to go to war with Spain over trade disputes. So, they dragged out Jenkins and his decomposed ear, paraded him in Parliament, and used it as a war cry. "Gentlemen, we must avenge this man's ear." What followed was a 9-year mess of naval battles, raids, and colonial skirmishes, most of which had absolutely nothing to do with Jenkins or his ear. Britain and Spain fought in the Caribbean, the Atlantic, and even Florida, but the war achieved little beyond massive casualties and a stalemate. In the end, the war became part of the larger War of Austrian Succession, and Jenkins, he vanished from history. His ear, however, had already made its mark, literally and figuratively. A war over trade, power, and a decayed body part. Was the ear even real? Maybe. Did it really matter? Not at all. But Britain got its war, Spain got its headache, and Jenkins got eternal infamy as the man whose ear started a war. The War Over Pastries, 1838 to 1839. If you ever thought lawsuits over bad customer service were excessive, wait until you hear about the time France declared war on Mexico over a pastry shop. Yes, an actual war. Cannons, ships, battles, the whole thing, all because one baker got stiffed. Our story begins with a French pastry chef named Remontel, who had set up shop in Mexico City. Back in 1828, his shop was allegedly ransacked by Mexican officers during a riot. Windows shattered, pastries destroyed, and worst of all, no compensation. Furious, Remontel demanded 600,000 pesos for damages, a number so exaggerated it could have bought him half of Mexico at the time. Mexico, of course, laughed him off, so Remontel took his complaint to the French government, hoping they'd back him up. To everyone's surprise, King Louis-Philippe of France actually listened. In fact, he had been looking for an excuse to flex France's military power over Mexico's unpaid debts. And what better excuse than a wronged pastry chef? In 1838, France demanded Mexico pay up 600,000 pesos, not just for Remontel, but for all French citizens who had suffered property damage in Mexico. When Mexico refused, France responded in the most rational way possible. They sent warships to blockade Mexico's ports. What started as a financial dispute over croissants escalated into full-blown naval attacks. The French Navy bombarded Veracruz, seized Mexico's entire fleet, and basically choked Mexico's economy with a blockade. Mexico, under President Anastasio Bustamante, tried to resist, but France had superior firepower. After months of fighting, Mexico finally caved and agreed to pay up. Mexico handed over the 600,000 pesos, Remontel got his money, and France packed up and left. The war lasted just a few months, but it set the stage for future conflicts between the two nations, including France's later attempt to install Maximilian as Emperor of Mexico in the 1860s. A pastry war might sound absurd, but if history teaches us anything, it's this: never underestimate the power of an angry baker. The War Over a Pig, 1859. You'd think that by the 19th century, wars would only be fought over serious issues: land, resources, politics. Nope. In 1859, Britain and the United States nearly went to war over one pig. Not a strategic piece of land, not a powerful political figure, just one very unlucky hog. The scene was San Juan Island, a disputed territory between British Canada and the US. The Hudson's Bay Company had set up a British settlement, while American settlers had started moving in. The two sides coexisted in mild tension, but nothing major had happened until June 15, 1859. An American farmer named Lyman Cutler found a large black pig rooting through his potato patch. This wasn't the first time it had happened, and Cutler had had enough, so he shot the pig. Turns out, the pig belonged to a British Hudson's Bay Company employee named Charles Griffin, who was not amused. Griffin demanded $100 in compensation, which was a fortune at the time. Cutler refused, claiming the pig had been trespassing on his land. So, naturally, this escalated into a military standoff between two nations. After the pig shooting incident, British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler, which led the American settlers to demand U.S. military protection. In response, the U.S. sent 66 soldiers to the island under Captain George Pickett. Yes, the same Pickett who later led the disastrous Pickett's Charge in the Civil War. The British, not to be outdone, sent 3 warships and hundreds of Marines. Within weeks, the island was flooded with heavily armed soldiers, all because of one pig. For months, both sides glared at each other, fingers on triggers, waiting for someone to make the first move. But nobody actually wanted to start a war, so instead of fighting, the soldiers just hung out. They traded food, told stories, and even celebrated holidays together. Eventually, cooler heads prevailed, and both nations agreed to joint occupation of the island until the dispute could be settled diplomatically. In 1872, the U.S. was granted full control of the island, and Britain accepted the ruling without a fight. The only casualty of the pig war was the pig. No humans were harmed, and the whole thing was resolved without a single shot fired. But let's be real, if you're going to start a war over an animal, at least pick one that can fight back. The War Over a Dog, 1925. If you thought a pig causing an international standoff was ridiculous, wait until you hear about the war started by a dog. In 1925, Greece and Bulgaria went from tense neighbors to outright combatants, all because a stray dog crossed the wrong border. The Greek-Bulgarian border had always been a hot zone. Both countries had fought over Macedonia during the Balkan Wars and World War I, and their relationship was about as friendly as two rival soccer teams with bad blood. On October 18, 1925, a Greek soldier stationed near the town of Petric, Bulgaria, was chasing his dog when it ran across the border into Bulgarian territory. The soldier, apparently not one to let go of a good boy that easily, followed it. Bulgarian border guards were not amused. They opened fire, killing the Greek soldier on sight, and just like that, a full-scale war was on the table. Greece, outraged over the death of their soldier, declared that Bulgaria had violated international law. Within days, Greek troops stormed the Bulgarian border, occupying villages and engaging in skirmishes. Bulgaria, likely thinking, "Are we seriously doing this over a dog?" sent urgent pleas to the League of Nations to intervene before things got out of hand. And they almost did. The Greeks were pushing deeper into Bulgarian territory, but before the situation could turn into a full-scale Balkan bloodbath, the League of Nations stepped in. They ordered an immediate ceasefire and demanded that Greece withdraw its troops. Greece reluctantly agreed, but not before being slapped with a fine. The League ruled in Bulgaria's favor, ordering Greece to pay 45,000 British pounds, around $3 million today, in damages. A soldier chased his dog, got shot, and two countries almost went to war. Bulgaria came out on top politically, while Greece got hit with an expensive lesson in border discipline. And the dog? No one knows what happened to it. Hopefully, it learned to stay in its lane. The War Against Birds, 1932. Most wars involve armies, weapons, and, actual enemies. But in 1932, Australia took up arms against an opponent that didn't even know it was in a war: emus. Yes, the flightless, long-necked birds that look like angry velociraptors in a bad mood. Spoiler alert, the birds won. After World War I, Australia gave land to returning soldiers in the western part of the country, hoping they'd take up farming. But nobody told the emus. As soon as farmers started planting crops, thousands of these oversized feathered menaces showed up and devoured everything like a plague of beaked locusts. The farmers, desperate and losing their livelihood, demanded that the government step in. The Australian military, fresh off actually fighting humans in World War I, decided this was a problem that required machine guns. Thus began the Great Emu War. In November 1932, the Australian military deployed Major G.P.W. Meredith and two soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns to take on the emus. The plan? Drive up in trucks and mow down the birds. This did not go well. Problem number 1. Emus are fast. They can run up to 40 miles per hour, and as soon as the shooting started, the birds scattered in every direction. Machine guns in the 1930s weren't exactly sniper rifles, so hitting a moving emu was harder than it looked. Problem number 2. Emus are surprisingly bullet-resistant. Even when soldiers managed to hit one, it often kept running like it had just shrugged off a minor inconvenience. Major Meredith later described them as having bulletproof armor because even direct hits didn't always bring them down. Problem number 3. Trucks don't work off-road. The Army tried chasing emus in vehicles, but quickly learned that bumpy terrain plus mounted machine guns equals horrible accuracy. One truck even crashed trying to chase a particularly evasive emu. After several weeks, Australia had burned through thousands of rounds of ammunition, but had only managed to kill around a few hundred emus. Meanwhile, the surviving 20,000 birds kept feasting on crops like nothing had happened. The military gave up, calling the whole thing a disaster. The emus had outmaneuvered modern warfare. One government official even admitted, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world." The farmers were left to fend for themselves, the emus declared victory, and Australia took an L so bad it became a national joke. The war over a soccer game, 1969. Soccer has always been a passionate sport, but in 1969, things got so heated between El Salvador and Honduras that it turned into an actual war. What started as a few bad calls and some national pride quickly escalated into bombings, invasions, and over 1,000 deaths. Tensions were already simmering between Honduras and El Salvador. Economic struggles, land disputes, and a mass deportation of Salvadoran immigrants from Honduras had created serious bad blood between the two nations. Then came the 1969 FIFA World Cup qualifiers. Honduras and El Salvador were both fighting for a spot in the tournament, and their 3-match series was anything but friendly. First match, June 8, 1969 in Honduras. Honduras won 1-0, but the night before, Salvadoran fans blasted music, honked horns, and made sure the Honduran team got zero sleep. Second match, June 15, 1969 in El Salvador. El Salvador won 3-0, and Honduran players were pelted with garbage as they left the field. Third match, June 26, 1969 in Mexico. A tiebreaker was held on neutral ground. El Salvador won 3-2 in overtime. Hours later, El Salvador cut diplomatic ties with Honduras. Within 2 weeks, both countries were mobilizing for war. On July 14, 1969, El Salvador launched an airstrike on Honduras, followed by a full-blown ground invasion. Honduran forces fought back, and the fighting quickly spiraled into chaos. El Salvador, despite being smaller, had the better army and pushed deep into Honduran territory. Honduras, however, had air superiority and bombed Salvadoran cities in retaliation. For 4 days, the two countries bombed, shot, and shelled each other, killing over 1,000 people and displacing over 100,000 civilians. Then, on July 18th, the Organization of American States, OAS, stepped in and brokered a ceasefire. El Salvador pulled out, but tensions never fully settled. The football war wasn't just about soccer, but it sure helped ignite the fire. A World Cup qualifier became the tipping point for two nations already on the edge of conflict. Honduras and El Salvador remained hostile for years, and it took over a decade before they finally signed a peace treaty. A war over soccer? Let's just say FIFA had bigger problems than bad refereeing that year. The 38-Minute War, 1896. Most wars last years, some months, and a few just weeks. But in 1896, Britain and Zanzibar managed to wrap up an entire war in 38 minutes. That's shorter than an episode of your favorite TV show. Zanzibar, an island off the coast of East Africa, was technically independent, but the British controlled it behind the scenes. They had an agreement. Any new sultan had to be approved by the British. But on August 25, 1896, Sultan Hamid bin Thuwaini, who had played nice with Britain, died under mysterious circumstances. His cousin, Khalid bin Bargash, immediately took over the palace without British approval. The British were not having it. They demanded he step down immediately. Khalid refused and instead barricaded himself in the palace with 2,800 armed men, cannons, and a yacht. The British gave him an ultimatum: surrender by 9 a.m. on August 27th or else. Khalid, thinking his men and a single yacht could take on the British Empire, said nah. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the British opened fire. Within minutes, they had blown up the Sultan's palace, sunk his yacht, destroyed Zanzibar's entire military, which consisted of a few cannons and some rifles. By 9:40 a.m., Khalid's forces were in shambles. 500 Zanzibari troops were dead or wounded, and Khalid himself had fled, hiding in the German consulate like a kid avoiding homework. By 9:45 a.m., Zanzibar surrendered. War over. The British installed a new sultan who actually listened to them, and Khalid spent the next few years hiding before eventually being exiled. 38 minutes. That's all it took for Zanzibar to lose a war. It holds the record as the shortest war in history. Khalid thought he could take on the largest naval power in the world with a palace and a boat. The British took less time to defeat him than it takes to cook a frozen pizza. Some wars are fought for years. Some, apparently, are just speedruns. The war that lasted 335 years, 1651 to 1986. Most wars end when one side surrenders, a treaty is signed, or everyone just runs out of things to fight over. But what happens when a war is declared and then completely forgotten? Welcome to the 335 Years' War, where literally no one noticed they were still fighting. In 1651, during the English Civil War, the Netherlands supported the Royalists, the guys backing King Charles II. The opposing parliamentarians took control of England and decided to punish anyone who had helped their enemies. One of the targets? The tiny Isles of Scilly, a rocky little archipelago off the coast of Cornwall. The Dutch, fed up with royalist pirates attacking their ships, decided to declare war on the entire Isles of Scilly. And then, they left. There was no actual battle, no shots fired, no one in England even cared because, well, England had bigger problems. But here's the kicker, no one ever signed a peace treaty. For over 3 centuries, the Isles of Scilly and the Netherlands were technically at war, but since neither side remembered, no one fought. The Dutch literally forgot they had declared it. The people of Scilly, probably too busy fishing to care. Fast forward to 1986, when a historian stumbled upon old war documents and realized, wait, are we still at war? The news spread, and the Dutch ambassador was eventually invited to Scilly to officially sign a peace treaty. After 335 years, the war finally ended, though no one could say exactly what had been achieved. This might be the least violent war in history. No casualties, no battles, just 3 centuries of pure diplomatic negligence. It took longer for the Netherlands to end this war than it did for them to establish their global empire, lose it, and rebuild their country. And what did Scilly learn from this? Probably that if you're going to get declared war on, pray your enemies forget about it. The War Over Fish, 1958 to 1976. Most wars involve land, power, or at least a decent excuse. But from 1958 to 1976, the United Kingdom and Iceland fought multiple conflicts over cod. Yes, fish. The cod wars were less about battlefield heroics and more about grown men ramming boats over seafood. Iceland, a small island nation, had one valuable resource: fish. The UK, having overfished its own waters, relied on Icelandic cod for its fishing industry. Everything was fine until Iceland decided it was done sharing. In 1958, Iceland unilaterally extended its fishing zone from 4 nautical miles to 12, banning foreign boats from its waters. The UK said nope and sent trawlers and warships to keep fishing anyway. Icelandic patrol boats harassed British ships, and just like that, the First Cod War began. Between 1958 and 1976, Iceland and Britain fought 3 separate cod wars. There were no actual battles, just a lot of Coast Guard boats ramming into British trawlers. Net-cutting devices are being used to sabotage fishing operations. Icelandic boats playing high-speed chicken with British warships. The UK, despite being a global military powerhouse, somehow couldn't overpower Icelandic fishing boats. Every time they tried to assert dominance, Iceland just expanded its fishing zone further, first to 50 miles, 1972, then to 200 miles, 1975. By 1976, Britain had bigger problems: economic decline, oil crises, Cold War tensions. Iceland, meanwhile, had threatened to leave NATO if they didn't get their way. The US, not wanting to lose a key ally, pressured Britain to back off. After nearly 2 decades of naval bumper cars, Britain gave up. Iceland got its 200-mile fishing zone, and the UK had to find fish elsewhere. This was a war where no one died, no shots were fired, and the biggest casualties were nets and ship hulls. But let's be real. The fact that a country as small as Iceland bullied Britain into submission over fish is probably the greatest underdog victory in maritime history. The war declared but never fought, 1914 to 1958. Most wars involve battles, destruction, and at least some effort. But in 1914, Andorra declared war on Germany, and then completely forgot about it for 44 years. Yes, an entire nation went to war and didn't do a single thing. Andorra, a tiny country wedged between France and Spain, had a population of around 6,000 people in 1914. When World War I broke out, the country wanted to show support for the Allies. So, like many other small nations, Andorra declared war on Germany. But here's the problem: Andorra had no army. Germany didn't care. No one told the rest of the world. While Europe was tearing itself apart, Andorra was just Chilling. They didn't send troops, didn't fire a single shot, and life carried on as usual. Finally, in 1958, a historian noticed the mistake. Andorra, after 44 years of unintentional hostility, finally signed a peace treaty with Germany, bringing an end to the most uneventful war in history. This wasn't a war, it was a clerical error. No battles, no losses, just 4 decades of forgetting to file paperwork. Andorra might not have fought, but it still holds a world record. The longest war, with 0 casualties, 0 battles, and 0 effort.